You may remember back in the day, 2018, when I was in the early days of Not Real Music, back when I held a camera instead of putting it on a tripod, back when I had the A, B, C, D, E, F, fuck you and your mum and your rating system. You know the time, if you've been following me for that long. Respect to you, I appreciate it, because I thought my older videos were pretty bad, to be honest. I mean, looking back, they kind of don't feel as good as they are now. Maybe I was more handsome back then, maybe I'm more handsome now, who knows, but still, it was a different time. And I reviewed Boarding House Reach and it got slated by the people. I was in awe of the reception the album got. I couldn't believe people were absolutely raving over it. I couldn't believe that. I think Fantano gave it a 9 and it was one of his albums of the year for that year. It wasn't like album of the year, it was like in his top 5, I think. I was just like, what am I listening to? Where are people talking? Whoa. The discussion around the album caused many debates. I was in awe of the fact that people actively went out their way to, listen to it regularly, because I just thought it was absolutely awful. So a few years later, we have a different time where Jack White has dropped a new album, Fear of the Dawn, and it's one of my favorite albums of the year. So I was like, nah. There's no way. Like, did I get Boarding House Reach wrong? Did I just think I hated it at the time, and years on I've changed and this new album is actually really good, and maybe his other album was actually fantastic as well? Like, I was just like, this is weird. There can't be that much of a quality difference between the two albums. Like, surely not. Similarly to how people were acting like Kid Cudi went from one of the worst albums of all time to then one of the best albums ever with Kids See Ghosts. I was just like, there isn't that much of a gap. Like, there's no way the gap isn't that wide. People are talking absolutely crazy nonsense. And I still think people are with that, to be honest. I don't think the gap is that big at all. But I was like, hang on, this is the same thing. Do I really think the gap between the two Jack White albums that have been dropped 4 years apart is that big? Do I? So it's time to bring back Do I Still Hate It, which I have done a video of this already this year. It's time to do another one. Yeah, Boarding House Reach. So I will say, to start with, yeah, I was a bit harsh on it at the time. I don't think it's quite as bad as I remember. I don't think I was fair in my review, and I haven't re-watched the review to see what I said or anything like that, because I don't really watch my reviews back very often. But I do think I was probably talking a bit bollocks. One thing I will say though is that I think the best tracks have actually remained quite similar. I think Over and Over and Over is fantastic. It's just such a heavy rocking tune. It feels like it could easily slip onto his newest album actually, and would be right at home. Coming immediately after Ice Station Zebra is bizarre though and jarring, because these are two night and day tracks, to be honest. Ice Station Zebra is trying a bit of a rapping thing. Not entirely sure it pays off for him, to be honest. He kind of sounds a bit corny. But the difference between this track and Over and Over and Over is just massively stark. Like, they're just so different. And Respect Commander brings that old school rocking grit that Over and Over and Over has as well. And again, I think this pays off for it too. The only thing I would say is that it just starts like, a bit muddy with the intro, and I just feel like you're waiting around for something to happen. I don't necessarily think that it needs to be like this, to be honest. This track was similar to Corporation in that the beginning of the track just feels like it goes on a bit too long, a bit tediously long, to be honest. But then you do have the Who's With Me refrain that repeats over and over again. I just feel like that could have been built around quicker, because by the end of the track there's way more to the song, but that first bit reminds me a lot of Into the Twilight from his newest album actually, where there just feels like there could be more lyrics, there could be more vocals coming through. Obviously, by the end of Corporation, there is, but it just takes too long to get to that point. Once it gets to that point, though, it feels like a call to action. It feels like a Jack White revolution, whatever that would even entail or look like. But it does remind me of something you'd get from Rage Against the Machine. Even his vocals were actually quite Rage Against the Machine on that part as well. And going all the way backwards to the first track, Connected by Love, I think this is a fantastic song, actually. This one and Over and Over and Over are really, really good songs. I think the warbling effect on the verses is very strange and odd and feels quite out of place, but it actually ends up working in the song's favour. The backing vocals though on the chorus, wow, the vocals here sound fantastic, and I think Jack White should utilize this more, because I think this is a really, really special moment on the song. It reminds me of something Rolling Stones would do, you know, something like Gimme Shelter, where the kind of gospel vocals come through and just impact the song so well. I feel like Jack White could probably have done this more across the album, to be honest. But that's the thing with this album, though. I think he's not trying to do one thing across the whole thing, and that's why it ends up being a bit hodgy-podgy mismatch, and came across as a bit too out of the realms of anything when I first heard it back in 2018. Although I have adapted to his style a bit more listening to it this time around, I still think that exists within the album, and it doesn't always pay off, which is a bit of a shame. Why Walk a Dog is probably the best example of this. This just feels too silly, to be honest. I mean, why does a dog need to be walked? He's just asking, he's just asking really weird questions, like, you know why that needs to be walked. If you don't walk your dog, you don't deserve a dog. I don't know if he's trying to be satirical or whatever, but it just comes across as a bit silly and profound in a weird way, that he's just asking questions that don't really matter or don't really need to be asked. It's like that one person in a class where, you know, the teacher's always like, there's no such thing as stupid questions. But there's always that one person that asks an actual stupid question. And you can see on the teacher's face, they're like, come on, but they can't say it because they just told you there's no such thing as stupid questions. This is that in the song. This is the song version of that. The Hyper Misophoniac track just has this really weird robotic melody. Again, this was what I disliked about the album from the first listen, really. There were just moments like this that just felt so out of place, and he was just trying to jar in things that didn't fit. You know, he just kind of like trying to shove something in to something, you know, plug socket maybe. This could be turned in a dirty way. I don't want to encourage that, but you know what I mean, like something that just doesn't fit, and he's just trying to shove it in, and it ain't working. Getting the Mineshaft is the best example of this. So this just feels weird for the sake of weird. It just feels strange for the sake of strange. And to be fair, it could pay off. You know, you can be weird and wacky and it can work, but I just don't think this works, to be honest. What's Done is Done is a more kind of ballad type track, I want to say. It feels like it would fit on an old White Stripes album where he does slow things down and brings you this kind of like country style vocal approach, you know what I mean? Like, he's not singing a country track, but he just has that accent to him that makes it feel like he is bringing a bit of a country vibe to the song. Of course, even in the lyrics as well, talking about getting a gun, and you know, that kind of idea does feel like something you would hear in a Johnny Cash song, perhaps. I actually quite like this track. I just think with the album being so all over the place stylistically, constantly shifting at every other track, this point in the album just doesn't feel like this kind of song makes sense. It's more of an issue with the album as a whole and how everything fits together rather than the song itself. Putting this right after Getting the Mineshaft doesn't make sense, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, overall, I'm still conflicted on this album. I still think there are moments that are actually a lot better than I gave them credit for when I first listened to it, for sure. I was certainly harsh on it back then. But even with the hindsight and, you know, thinking about his newer album, and looking at this and comparing them and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't, I actually don't think this album is quite as good or even that close to Fear of the Dawn, to be honest. The gap isn't huge. It's not as big as it was when I first reviewed Boarding House Reach and before I went back to listen to it before this video. Like, the gap was like, you know, we're talking like bloody 3 out of 10, 8 out of 10 sort of thing. I really did not like the album, basically. But the gap isn't as big as that. I think this album is actually just kind of bordering on the 5 out of 10 range-ish, that kind of area, which is an improvement, but still doesn't fully work. I still think a lot of his experiments and his weird wackiness didn't always pay off in this album. And I think it was an interesting way to go about it. I kind of commend him for going in this direction, because he certainly alienated a lot of fans who really hated this. So, you know, I appreciate that he wanted to do something like this, but for me, it still doesn't fully work. Better Than I Remember. Do I still hate it? No, I don't. I don't hate it. So a success. I think that's a success. I don't really like it that much, but it's definitely an improvement. So thank you as always for watching these videos. Tell me what you think in the comments. Would love to see what you guys think of what my opinions on this. Check out my Patreon, you can support me on there, and join the Discord server just for $1, £1 a month. It's very little. If you want to join the Discord server where we talk about music every day, do it. Thank you as always. Have a good day. Goodbye.